Welcome.
Hi. Hello. Welcome. Thank you for dropping by. Have any of you been to an open garden day before? You have? Right, well just wander around as you like. You know, do your own thing. Although I'll warn you, I like to chat. Sitting here on my own, I love it when people stop to chat. We usually get a wonderful mix of villagers and other visitors from all over the UK and abroad, so I hear a lot of stories. Yeah, this is the ghost of the orchard that stood here before they built all the housing in the 60s and 70s. They had to pay a fine for every tree they were going to cut down. But they were going to make so much money from the housing they didn't care. Whole orchards of useful trees. But a few rogue saplings survive. There's one over there. Cherries. I love the word cherries. Cherry blossom, cherry wood, cherry wine. Whatever that is. The best and the sweetest cherries are the little black ones that they use for pies and turnovers, and they're the longest living ones too, and the trees grow much taller than you expect. I love the feel of the bark, that shiny cracked ancient look, running my hands down it. They use the bark for cough syrup, and you can eat the blossom, and the wood has been used for centuries for making furniture, and cherry wood is special enough to be used for marriage chairs. The wood turner making a chair beautiful enough for his beautiful wife to sit in by the fire. You still see them sometimes in local pubs. The chairs, not the wives. Right, we are on chalk land here, and the cherries love the chalk. Here, have a look at these, right? You'll pick them up here and there. There you go. Have a look at that old flint there. There you go, have a fossil. Pass it round, don't nick it. Right. Yeah, the cherries love the chalk, and so this garden is built on chalk and flint. And the chalk ridges were formed about 90 million years ago, when the whole of Western Europe was a tropical sea. Tiny creatures' bodies silted up to form this enormous giant chalk dome, which was then weathered into the hills that we see around us, and so you get these fossils everywhere. And the chalk is layered throughout with flint, used for making flint tools, scrapers, knives. 5,000 years ago, this is an ancient land. We are treading on the paths of the ancients. They sat here and dreamt and thought by white burial mounds and barrows, the bones layered in with the fossils gleaming in the moonlight. Just the sound of the lamb's cries and their own voices, knapping the flint, making ironwork, jewellery, poetry. A million stars overhead. Feels a bit like the good old days, doesn't it? That's something everyone says. Oh, everything's changing, the old ways are going. I'll read this bit for you. The old life is being swiftly obliterated. The valley is passing out of the hands of its former inhabitants. They are being crowded into corners and are becoming as aliens in their own home. They are receding before newcomers with new ideas. In another 10 years, there will not be much left of the traditional life. That bit's from this book I'm reading, George Sturt, written in 1927. And he, in turn, talks about Goldsmith in 1770, the deserted village. Sweet, smiling village, loveliest of the lawn, thy sports are fled, and all thy charms withdrawn. One only master grasps the whole domain, and half a tillage stints thy smiling plain. No more thy glassy brook reflects the day, but choked with sedges works its weedy way. Oh dear God. Looks like we're always feeling that something's been lost or is being lost, and how can we hold on to it? What do we want to keep? What do we want to let go? I bet the Celts felt like that too, don't you? Oh my God, everything's changing! And there is something there to that old Celtic magic, the peace, the simplicity, something we all yearn for, although the food wasn't up to much. Bread, bitter herbs, mutton, nettles, and a primitive form of parsnip, until the Romans came and they brought garlic, onions, leeks, asparagus, walnuts, sweet chestnuts, rosemary, thyme, basil, apples, grapes, and of course cherries. The cherries are iconic, I think. The history of the cherry is the history of England. Well, southern England anyway. For example, right, the Roman soldiers, they used to eat the cherries. And spit out the stones as they marched. So every Roman road was lined with cherry trees, so the story goes. And then these cherry trees grew wild in the woods and in the hedgerows until a few centuries ago when they started planting the orchards. And I was saying all this to my mate Roy from the village. He popped by yesterday. He's a local man. He grew up on the chalk in the 40s and 50s with the cherries, and he's a fountain of knowledge, a local historian full of facts and figures and stories. He showed me a picture of his house as it was, Tudor maybe, even older. He said to me, right, our family goes back to 1725. Yeah, that's as far as I've got. We were farmers. We farmed all the farms in a village at one time or another. I'm from a family of 5, but my gramps and my grandpa, they were from families of 12 or 13, not unusual then. Yeah, we had a bit of gamekeeping, bit of poaching, of course. And between the wars, you could have a few rabbits, pheasant, maybe sell to the local butcher. Yeah, we had no running water, but we had a well, and we had oil lamps and candles, no phone, and the only thing our mum went to the greengrocer's for was a bit of fruit. We had plum trees and all that, of course, and plenty of vegetables, and back then you had the vegetables in season, you know, so later in the year you could have the Brussels. Oh yeah, and our little black cherries for cherry pie Sunday. Yeah, most of the old houses then, they had large gardens with fruit trees, you know, and an orchard was seen as an asset to help sell the house. Yeah, I remember a glorious tree of white cherries from my childhood in our back garden. And yeah, the last orchard would have been planted 1900, and one of the first, now covered in housing, about 1500. Yeah, people used to come, you know, before the war. In the cherry villages, people used to come to see the blossom. White blossom everywhere, only white. They'd come from Wickham and even London just to look at the blossom. He bought a newspaper clipping to show me from the Bucks Herald, Saturday, May the 11th, 1901. For above half a mile you walk along a narrow lane bordered on either side by orchards and gardens planted with fruit trees, whose overhanging branches are one exquisite mass of lovely bloom, filling the air with a faint odour and giving promise of an abundant crop. These cherry blossoms last a couple of weeks, and then the wind blows all the petals to the ground, and the more important work of the tree begins, the cherry itself. Yeah, I could have gone into farming, but I said I'm not doing that, it's dirty. I'm going to go into a clean job, something more modern, so I said I was going to work at the chair factory in Winchmore Hill. See a bit of life. And I cycled to work there all through the winter with the old chaps, the bodgers, and they were the last of the cherry pickers too, out there every harvest, a working holiday. Here, now the village has changed. We used to have a draper's and and a village store, and then another village store at the other end of the main road, and a hairdressers, and a butcher's, and a post office. And now even more housing estates are popping up all round the boundary. Farm's gone. Been put up for sale. House has been sold off. Barn sold off. Land sold off to a supermarket. My mate took me to Kent last year and he showed me one of the old orchards there that's been sold off. And this bloke, he's a banker. Yeah. He's bought this orchard and he's never even seen it. He's never even been there. I need a pee. And he nipped off to use the loo in the house. So this was all happening about 70 or 80 years ago. Already history. The last of generations and generations in that house. Gave me a bit of a shiver to think about it, you know. And I like to think about the orchards back then, the cherry trees reaching up into the sun, each one studded with tiny white flowers full of bees and insects. The place must have been alive with the sound of insects then, under the canopy. A cuckoo, maybe, if you were lucky. Can't remember the last time I heard a cuckoo. To be alive under the cherry blossom. Just to be alive in the spring. He came back, he said, the range used to get so hot in the winter, we'd all be sat round in our pants. Just then, I saw a woman walking past. I recognised her. She's staying with one of the other women in the village. She looked like she'd walked a long way. So Roy left, promising some homemade jam later in the year. Cheers, Roy. She'd come on ahead of the group she was with because she could walk so much faster. Her name was Nyora. She told me it meant graceful. She said back home, before the war, she used to love walking on the hills of the city and down to the river and along by the water to the old bridge. And so she was used to walking. And she'd walked away to freedom as well. Away from the fighting. Away from the ruined buildings and the disappearance of her friends. Away from her job at the university where she was too outspoken and too well known. And so away even from her family. I thought she might cry for a moment, but she didn't. And now I am here. I cannot stop walking. I have to walk every day and longer walks at the weekend. I cannot be at home in any room with a closed door, so I have to keep walking. And now I am walking the ridgeway with a group of women from the village, treading that old track. I love to walk in the evenings when the sun is setting. See the chalk hills and the sheep paths. The grass is bending and flexing in the breeze, always returning upright. I can hear the complex, clear sound of the blackbird, each one with his own fluting song. The larks high above the fields, the sheep softly chewing, stopping to stare at me as I walk past and nodding hello, and they go back to the grass. Only when I am up there do I feel safe again, where I can see for miles and there is nobody else around. She stopped a little embarrassed, so I let her be to sit quietly and eat some cherries like they were precious fruit. And then we heard laughing and a loud, boisterous chatter, and it was the women she'd set off with. Oh, full of jokes and laughter, like a group of goldfinches, loud, sweaty and hungry, their daughters trailing behind them. They wanted to pee, of course, so I showed them the way. And I gave them some cherries, and in that heat, I could see how enticing they were. One of them, Becky, stopped to chat to me whilst the others sorted themselves out. She's the woman that Nyora is staying with. They They'd been to the pub where they'd had chips and they'd drunk beer and they'd walked there along the chalk paths and through the hill fort, and now they were on their way back again along the valley to Wickham. A little bit the worse for wear. She told me she'd seen one of the rarer orchids. A monkey orchid. It's like a long-tailed monkey dancing. And bee orchids that smell like a bee to another bee. Oh, she said, bending in closer, I've also seen the most rare orchid round here. Beautiful, priceless. I could take you to where it is, but then I'd have to kill you. She's been teaching the women about the place names, the really old ones like Chiltern, a Celtic name for the land beyond the hills, a magical place. And the Saxon ones, ing, meaning people, coombe, meaning valley, ham, a group of houses, and ton, an enclosure. And then the name of the leader goes at the beginning. So Goring is the people of Gore, and Watling Ton is the enclosure of the people of Wat. Chinner is the hill or aura of Mr. Chiona, and believe it or not, Luton is one of the oldest settlements around here. Stone Age villages around Green and Mixes Hill. Yeah. And Luton is named after the Celtic god Lugh, L-U-G-H, but pronounced Lou. And the river was once called Lou, and so the settlement, Lou's Town, later became Luton. But we were all sniggering by then whilst her daughter rolled her eyes. She said, we've seen crab apples, sloes, rose hips, rowan, mint, knapweed, sorrel, clover, vetch, wild violet, comfrey for broken bones, chamomile for the stomach, fat hen, scabious, viper's bugloss, and the wildlife we've seen buff-tailed bees, red-tailed bees, large skipper, duke of Burgundy, and blue Adonis butterflies. And then we came upon a group of bird watchers, and they had their long lenses trained on a copse where there's a pair of barn owls nesting. Oh yeah, I said, you see them sometimes, they're huge wings billowing in the darkness. And rabbits and deer! Oh right, I said, rabbits, they were Roman. Yeah, along with ground elder. Ground elder? You can eat it in a salad! No, you can't, I said, I've tried. Her daughter was getting twitchy by this point. I'm teaching her as well. It's so important to name your place. Really important, she needs to know this stuff. Our name is Saxon. Wootton. A town by a wood, the Beechwoods probably. Yeah. So I'm one of them, still living on here, probably near the same village. Our family traces back 400 years, and my great uncle was one of the last bodgers turning the chair legs in his workshop, and I got pictures of my granny and my great granny up on the hill where we used to go for picnics and we used to go blackberrying, and they used to tell me that back in the day, before they had phones, the women would be out in their gardens in the evening watching the children and picking the vegetables, and they'd have whole shouted conversations from one side of the village to the other. So it'd be like this. Oi, Muriel, guess what? What's that, Polly? Mary's pregnant again! She's not. What's that, number 13? So they never actually had to leave the house. Yeah. Women always find a way. She started singing then. Her daughter literally ran away. Some of the other women joined in. You might know it. Through bushes and through briars, I've lately made my way, all for to hear the small birds sing, and the lambs to skip and play. All for to hear the small birds sing, and the lambs to skip and play. And then suddenly, they were off again. A shared movement, laughing, singing, gathering up their daughters and their sisters and their friends. A fantastic wave of knowledge and laughter and companionship. I turned and looked at the solitary woman Nyura, her eyes closed, letting it wash over her. She'd been reabsorbed and she'd broken away again. She looked up at me and smiled. They tried to break my arms in the cell. They tried to take away my voice, but they failed. And I left. And I haven't stopped walking since. I wanted to touch her or hug her or somehow try and make it feel better, but her aloneness radiated from her like an aura. She smiled and off she went. I think she was taking a different, longer route, maybe meet up with the women later. She waved goodbye, her strong legs carrying her up and away to safety. So then I was thinking about the Cherries and the cherry villages like Blackwell Heath and Homer Green. And I was wondering who planted the orchards back in the 1500s. So I went and I looked it up. And you know who it was? I'm Henry VIII, I am. I'm Henry VIII. It was Henry VIII, that guy. Yeah. He loved cherries. Of course he did. Which he tasted in France. And after the split from Rome, he did everything he could to show his power and use the wealth from the monastery. So he ordered orchards and fruit gardens to be grown. And all around here they grew them, starting with the native ones, and then they started growing the cultivated ones. They have great names. You've got your Frognor, and your Bigaroo, your Kasha, and your Nap. And the harvest was the highlight of the year, where everyone set to pick the villagers, men from other villages coming in from Wickham. And as the cherries were ripening, agreement would be made about forming picking groups and try and forecast the weather. And this old chap, he had a clay pipe in his mouth, and if the pipe was pointing upwards, sun's out. And if it was pointing downwards, gonna rain. The baskets were called sieves, and when they were full, they'd be covered in straw and they'd have a couple of hazel sticks to keep them in place, and that's how they'd go to market. And they would be woken at dawn with the cry, "They will have 'em! They will have 'em! They will have 'em!" And banging on tins, the bird scarers in the orchard ready for the picking. It was a good few weeks of really well-paid work, a working holiday, moving around the different orchards, getting double, maybe even treble wages coming up from the mills and the factories, working from dawn to dusk. And a lot of gossip got passed on from tree to tree as well, all while standing on these giant ladders. Giant ladders. Because the trees would go up to 70 foot, so the ladders could have maybe 72 rungs, and it'd take two men, one to steady, one to climb. And they'd go up as high as possible, and they would reach out as far as they could, and the cherries must be picked with the stalks, not milked without, because that way they keep better. They'd camp out under the orchard or in sheds and barns, and they'd have a campfire and they'd brew the kettle, and breakfast would be fry up and lunch would be a fry up and great camaraderie. And when they'd picked enough for the day, they'd go down the pub for some bread and cheese or a pint, and then they'd move on up country. That's 10 or 15 miles, all the way to Harmondsworth or Aylesbury to pick the later fruit. Once they were done, the cherries would go to the local railway station where they'd be put on a train, and they would be in Covent Garden by the morning. And I like to think there was probably someone who took a few and sold them on the side of the road for hot, dusty travellers. Just then my phone went. It was a text from my oldest mate, Lynn. So I called her back. Usual chit-chat, you know, it was a quiet patch before lunch. I could hear her son, Aaron, in the background. They live by the sea. It's a bit run down, blighted by different planning ideas, you know. Friendly place, but for young people it's a bit... Well, he's supposed to be in school, but he doesn't always go. He'd prefer to shoot zombies on his PS4. He came on the phone to say hello. And when I told him where I was in the Chilterns, I said, oh, it's a bit like a big park. And he says, is it a theme park? Can I come? It's not a theme park, mate. Swings? No, it's not that kind of park, Aaron. It's a bit like the Downs. Aaron, you live there. You can see the South Downs Park from your window. It's right above the town. You should try walking there sometime. What's the point in that? And anyway, there's fences everywhere. Lynn says he very rarely leaves the town. Him and his mates, they're all big round the town. They're all swearing and bluffing and bantering. But when she took them all to Eastbourne for the day, they barely spoke. Too scared to go to Eastbourne. Becky, on the walk, right? She knew her family history. She knew the history of her name, naming all the plants, naming her place, teaching her daughter. But Aaron doesn't have that. For some reason, that's blocked for him. Roy told me about the day they opened the Ridgeway as a national trail back in 1972. It forms part of the Icknield Way, and for 5,000 years it was a really important trade route from Dorset all the way to Hunstanton. Really important path for the people. He told me. Yeah, we had about 50 cyclists, loads of walkers, some horse riders, a big send-off, someone important from the local council came, a local mayor probably. Yes, loads of people, 150 people, all cheering, hooray, you know. So what was all that for then? The right to roam. If Aaron doesn't feel it's for him, all he knows is cuts. He has the seaside, of course. They go fishing at night, catch mackerel, sell it to day trippers, eat chips, jump off the harbour on a hot day. I told him about how people used to go when it was a holiday resort with fairground rides and candy floss. Eat jellied eels and drink tea from a flask on the gritty sand, but he doesn't believe me. Because it's all a car park now that you have to pay to go into. And a fenced off beach. So that's been cut too. Aaron, this land is your land. We need to conserve it. We need to protect it. We need to restore it. They keep trying to steal it from us. Save the cherries, Aaron! You're all eco-warriors now! Aaron! Trouble is, Eva, there's just so much to do all the time. And I don't know what will happen to me if I go outside. And that's the truth. And he hung up. I texted Lynn to say goodbye, messages shooting like stars across the chalk. She's busy, of course. Tell him he can come and work with me. He won't, she said. There was a quiet patch. I closed my eyes and listened to the bees. Merrily, merrily shall I live now, under the blossom that hangs from the bough. Merrily, merrily shall I live now, under the blossom that hangs from the bough. I stopped and I realised a woman was singing along with me. Under the blossom that hangs from the bough. We laughed. She said, not many people know that song. I recognised her. Her name's Jeannie. She lives in the next village, the one with the supermarket on the bit where the old orchard is. She had a little dog with her, Tansy, a spaniel. She told me about all the local fetes she'd been to, She goes to all the local fetes around here with the dog shows, and she told me her schedule, so listen up. Arrive at the fete early. First, into the car park. Next, into the plant stall. Buy up all the good stuff at excellent prices. Then, nip over to the jam and chutney stall. Excellent homemade stuff for a song from the good ladies of whichever village it is. Take all of that stuff back to the car. Then, head back in. Wander round. Eat strawberries and cream. Drink Pimm's. And then, to the dog show. One of my dogs usually wins. Best puppy, handsomest dog, prettiest bitch. You're the prettiest bitch, aren't you, Tansy? Yes, you are. Well done. Scoop up the prize money, back to the plant stall, get the last knockings for 30 pence and bugger off back home. Waving goodbye at all the chaps with their cravats polishing their vintage cars. Cheerio, peers. This is a professional fete goer. I'm just passing on the top tips. She's got an amazing garden, apparently. A cottage garden. It's full of hollyhocks and lavender and roses. No cherry trees left there. But it's even got a well and a range. In fact, I thought it might have been Roy's old house. Oh, we've had to make a lot of improvements over the years because the kitchen floods terribly in the winter. She told me all about the Cherry Pie Festival, the one that celebrates the harvest. After the harvest, the little black cherries, not much flesh on them, but they're very juicy. They would sell them to the local towns and villages, and then they would have a party, and they'd have the cherry fair, and there would be much drinking and misbehaving. They were even told off in a sermon in 1773 for their vanity, riot, profaneness, and Sabbath breaking. They'd have the party in a string band, and they would eat sparrow pie, which was economical use of the sparrows that got shot in the scaring. And then everybody would make a cherry pie. They would have the cherry pie supper, break off a corner, a good half a cup full of juice, lovely sweet cherries, no bigger than your thumbnail. Drink some of the juice and then carry on. That is the proper way to eat cherry pie. Spit out your pips anywhere. Oof. And she told me about the lace makers, the Huguenots, who came here in the 16th century and taught everyone the buck's point lace and the black silk lace for white dresses. The local girls learnt it very young as a steady source of income, and the best place for lace making is outdoors because of the light. So during the summer they could sit on their doorsteps, and in the winter they would work by oil lamp, and they would pop round to each other's cottages to save on fuel, each taking a few tea leaves for the pot. The bobbin lace making was eventually replaced by machines, of course. Yeah. And she wants to revive some of the old traditions, not the sparrow pie probably, and get speakers and books and local school children involved, learning or maybe relearning some of the stuff we all used to know, like how you belong in your place, wherever you come from. I asked her, "What do you make with the cherries, Jeannie?" Nigella's cherry pie, of course. You can't go wrong with Nigella's cherries. Come on, Tansy. And off they went. How clear the skies would have been then, as they camped out under the trees. Owls and foxes and badgers, a dog barking in the distance. And after they were done, as they lay exhausted, singing along with the string band, their voices reaching up into the trees, up into the hills of the chalk, up to the hill forts and the barrows, and across the 4 counties. The harvest is so powerful, it must be celebrated everywhere. The whole cycle from seed to sapling to flower to fruit to seed again, the stones landing again in the chalk and growing again. And each part of that cycle interacts with the whole web of life, bees, wasps, flies, birds, humans. A longer view. We can't have one without the other. Maybe we should all be on tree time, deep time. So much in this one little fruit, eh? From villages to farms, acres and acres of intensively grown ones whilst the old orchards are lost or left unpicked and untended. We need some of the old skills back. And then another bloke popped by, Mike. I was telling him about Aaron and the invisible fence that seems to shut him out from the land and everything that means, the beauty, the changing clouds, the music, the songs, the traditions. And he agreed with me about the lack of skills. Mike spends his blissful older years fixing and mending buildings and bits of old machinery in an open-air museum, along with a load of other chaps, in the endless sunny afternoon of their retirement. You could almost hear the wives waving them off. All right, off you go, love. See you later. Yeah, I'll be fine. Bye then. See ya. Bye. Bye! Pottering and tinkering and saving the world, he told me. But we're all retired engineers and such like, and if you've been an engineer for any length of time, you can't give it up, it's in your blood. I've only been doing it 62 years. Yeah. The whole museum is full of people practicing these old work skills. So you've got you've got your brickworks and your thatching and your ironworks and your blacksmithing and your lace making and your bodging and your straw plaiting. Our wheelwright, he's making wheels like they used to make in the olden days out of old oak and ash, just like the Saxons. Yeah, my favourite place is Desborough Castle, an ancient site. And when you walk round there and you cast your mind back thousands of years and you think how they used to live, well they had engineers as well. They had stone and bronze tools, but they still did things. The principle hadn't changed. They were utilising the raw materials to turn into tools. They were thinking, how can we make this better? Yeah. And the kids that come round, most of them at primary level, they're very interested. They're like, oh, what does this do? What does that do? And when you explain it to them, you can see the wheels turning. But as they get older and they're all on their phones and they're thinking, oh, why do we have to come round this? It's boring, it's all old hat. But if these died and your central systems died, this would still work. If all your tech suddenly went downhill, you could still use this. Yeah, I've still got my tools that I gathered in as an apprentice, but they don't think it's the future. There'll be a big gap when I go, I tell you, a big gap. Yeah. People just throw things away nowadays. When I tell them, you can mend it, they are astonished. I work my magic, I sharpen it up. Oh, they're amazed. Oh, we've always just bought a new one, they say. They've lost the thinking, the way of thinking that says if you haven't got what you need, well, then you invent it. And if you haven't got the tool, you invent the tool. And that tool could be a lathe or a flint or the sharp edge of an old Coke can, whatever is to hand and whatever works. Now, I knew Aaron would understand this because of the whole apocalypse thing. How will you survive if and when the zombies take over? That soon focuses the mind. Yeah, I know, there's a lot of doom and gloom about all of this, the coming apocalypse, but maybe it's not so far-fetched, eh? Yeah. We've all got to become engineers and artists and makers and learn about medicine and the stars. We need to learn about this stuff in order to understand it, in order to save it, in order to regrow it. We can't afford neglected orchards or ghostly estates or acres of manicured flowers or carving up hills and fields and hedgerows just to get somewhere else a little bit faster. As Martin Luther said, even if I knew tomorrow the world would go to pieces, I would still plant my apple tree. And that endless summer afternoon has a sense of urgency now. We need to learn from them before they leave us. And meanwhile, we better start throwing bee bombs and planting trees and growing wonky carrots and walking along the footpaths. And I am definitely looking forward to learning how to turn a lathe and how to use half a Coke can as a cutting tool. After everyone had left, I was sitting with my tea. The sun was setting over the hills. Blackbirds were singing. And the little bat started flying to and fro above my head. And I had a moment, just one moment, where I was really and truly aware of the connection of all the life that inhabits the hills and its dependence on us. There is an innocence to a blackbird singing and a bee burrowing into a flower. They are actually dependent on us to make this change. They can't do it. They can only live or die. It was just a moment. I had my back turned to the garden. And in that half-light at dusk, when the flowers become whiter and release their fragrance, suddenly aware that someone was there. No one had walked past or stopped by. I turned my head very slowly. And I could see a figure under a cherry tree, looking up into the branches, gently holding some cherries and eating them. For some reason I didn't move. And then suddenly I saw the whole orchard. The trees, the blossom, the fruit. Just enjoying the cherries in a moment of rest from work, perhaps. A moment at dusk in the Chilterns, across hundreds of years. I must have blinked and then they were gone. True story. Oh, right, I better start packing up. Yeah. I love cherries too. But I make sour cherry soup with them from a recipe that my dad taught me that he brought over with him when he had to leave Hungary. It's a traditional recipe. It's called meglavesh. Served cold. Delicious on a hot summer's day. Served with sour balaton cherries. We have many, many sour cherry trees at home, my darling, he said. Maybe the Romans brought cherries to them as well. And the soup brings together all sorts of different flavours. Eastern, Asian, European, cherries mixed in with sour cream and cloves and cinnamon. But you can add other stuff too. You could have fennel, wine and herbs. You just make it your own. And everyone eats it in Germany, Austria, Poland, Slovakia. And it even travelled to America and Canada where they sweetened it up, of course. Oh, I yearn for it sometimes. It's one of the flavours of my childhood. My family's splintered now. Some went to America, some across Europe. My dad came here with the other Hungarians and Poles and Russians, and they made a life for themselves here. Some work, learnt a bit of English. Everyone spoke at least a little English. Not Hungarian though, no one speaks Hungarian. They had to come here, pulling together. And I was born here and I grew up here, so this is my place. And I look after the trees, what's left of them, maintain the ghosts of the orchards. I might need a bit of help soon. The garden gets overgrown so quickly. Someone who can put roots down into the land like I have. Aaron, maybe. If Lynn will let him. I'll tell him. England has always been full of different people and different stories. Chiltern cherries, English cherries, Roman, Italian, German, Saxon, French, Norman, England, past, present and future. Like 1927 and not like 1927. Like 1770 and not like 1770. England changes, and England stays the same. We have this unique place right on our doorstep, and we're all gatekeepers and custodians and guardians and engineers. We have to decide what we need and what we want, and if we don't have it, we have to invent it, I'll tell him. And like Becky, I'll tell him the names of the places and the stories behind him, and the names of the different trees. Watch the owls and the red kites. Hear the larks. See the stars on a clear night. Stand by the trees and feel the bark. And remember the orchards. Become one with the chalk, as we all will. So eat your cherries, spit out your stones, and grow some more trees. Yoik bagat, as my dad used to say. Bon appetit.